Hello everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Take 5, How to Put Mindfulness in Action for Resilience, Collaboration, and a Psychologically Safe Workplace. My name is Laura Mullally, and I'm the Program Manager of Prevention and Promotion at the Mental Health Commission of Canada. And I'm very happy to be hosting this webinar with you today as a part of our monthly workplace webinar series. Before we get started, I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping items. So firstly, audio is provided to you in broadcast mode through your computer speakers. So you can hear us, but we cannot hear you. This webinar is also being recorded and will be posted on the Mental Health Commission of Canada's website in the Webinar Archive section following this presentation in a few weeks. If you do want a copy of today's slide deck or PowerPoint presentation, you can download it right now using the Files pod on the right center of your screen. To select the file name saying Take 5, How to Put Mindfulness in Action, and then click Download File, and it'll download onto your computer. I also invite you to send questions using the Q&A pod, which can be found on the bottom right of your screen. Questions posted in this pod will go directly to us here hosting the webinar today at the Commission, and we'll hold the questions until the end of the webinar and ask them in a facilitated Q&A session at the end. Finally, as a part of this webinar, MindWell-U is gifting all registrants with a free trial to a 30-day mindfulness challenge. So if you registered for this webinar and consented to be followed up with by MindWell-U, you'll receive an email with all of the details about that trial following this webinar. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our guest speaker today. Dr. Geoff Soloway has been innovating in the area of mindful well-being for almost 20 years. Geoff completed a PhD in the area of mindfulness and a Master's of Education from the University of Toronto, as well as a certificate in organizational coaching from the University of British Columbia. Geoff has worked in academic and HR roles at the University of Toronto, University of British Columbia, and the University of Fraser Valley, and as a consultant for diverse organizations such as WestJet, Coca-Cola, Loblaws, and the Privy Council Office in the Government of Canada. Geoff is the founder of MindWell-U, offering evidence-based in-person and online mindfulness training solutions to organizations across Canada and the U.S. Welcome, Geoff. I'll pass it over to you to get our discussion started.
Thank you so much, and welcome to everybody who's joined the webinar today. I hear we've had a really great response, so showing that there's a ton of interest, and big thank you to the Mental Health Commission of Canada for organizing the event. I'm really delighted to be here, and I've tried to prepare a presentation that will hopefully meet your interests and needs. I've tried to make it as practical as possible and share my experiences just as an outline of what I'm going to present about. I'm going to start with positioning mindfulness, a little intro to mindfulness. Then I'm going to move into Take 5, this mindfulness in action practice, go a little bit deeper into that. And then finally, I'm going to close with 5 tips for integrating mindfulness into an organization. All the while, I'm going to weave in some of the factors from the Psychological Health and Safety Standards from the Mental Health Commission of Canada, as well as different anecdotes and data from case studies from working with clients. So if you do have questions, please put them forward, and we will look forward to getting to them toward the end of the presentation. That was my intro. So from obscure to obvious, there's lots of things that we've experienced and behaviors in our world that have gone from this place from obscure to obvious. And I'd like to talk about a few. Brushing your teeth. At one point in time, brushing your teeth was not a normal thing. It was actually quite bizarre to take this toothbrush as we come to know it now, and to actually use it multiple times a day and to brush our teeth. So at one point this was quite bizarre, but now, we take it for granted. It's obvious. Seatbelts, another one. We used to drive cars and we just didn't wear seatbelts. They didn't exist. But now you can't even drive in a car without your alarms ringing off the hook. And soon they're probably not going to even drive if you're not wearing your seatbelt. If you running down the road, you might question, where are those people? You might look behind them, actually, and see, who's chasing those people? What are they running from? We didn't even have this notion of jogging But now, jogging is the new normal, and it's a very popular activity of physical exercise. Bike helmets. We never used to have to wear bike helmets or any type of helmets, really. I mean, hockey players and goalies specifically never used to wear hockey helmets. I mean, it seems crazy today, especially with the amount of head injuries, and people aren't allowed to bike or play sports or hockey without wearing a proper helmet. So we've seen a major movement from obscure to obvious in that arena as well. Mindfulness. So now we can look at mindfulness, and it's moving along that same trend from obscure to now becoming pretty obvious. And it's becoming mainstream. We see it on the front page of articles, magazines. We see it popular in elite athletes. We see it in public education. We see it in public health care. These are a listing of some of the clients that MindWell-U that I work with over the past year. So we're starting to see that mindfulness is also becoming, moving from this place of obscure to obvious. And it's worth noting that there's a difference between a trend and a fad. And mindfulness is not just a fad. It's not the flavor of the month. And we know that because it's coming from a long history. Mindfulness actually comes from over 2,500 years old, from contemplative traditions, the roots of the practice. And it comes from a long history of even being in North America and research on the training as well. So I think we can say that mindfulness isn't just a fad that's going to burn away and something else is going to come up. I think it's more of a trend that we're going to see and becoming obvious. Another way that I like to talk about mindfulness is this new literacy. It's really a new way of reading the moment. And when I'm talking about reading the moment, in a couple ways I'd like to position that. Literally, it's about attention to words on the page. So think about for a moment, have you ever had the experience of reading a page of a book, getting to the bottom of the page, and not having any idea of what you just read? Yeah, it happens sometimes, right? So literally, it means our ability to retain information, to stay focused. But more metaphorically, it also means around, are we still here? I heard a beep. But we can also understand it as reading a moment in terms of seeing the context of a moment, looking at our biases, our assumptions. We can look at what's right here in front of us. Mindfulness is all about being in the moment and seeing what's actually here versus some interpretation about what's here. We like to make up stories about an event, maybe in the workplace. We see our boss says something to us or has a gesture, and we interpret that to mean something, but that could be totally wrong. So mindfulness is all about learning to read the moment of what's actually there. It's also about regulating ourselves. So I think that mindfulness is this new form of literacy, and that's why we're teaching it in K-12 education. It's a new way of learning to use our mind. It's a new way of actually using our brains. We're actually strengthening different parts of the brain so we can locate where mindfulness, quote unquote, shows up in the brain, similar to like math. At some point we weren't very good at math, and then we developed those skills of math, and now we understand math to show up and light up in different parts of the brains. I think we're moving towards that same type of direction with mindfulness. Now, when you look at the inverse of mindfulness, we come to mindlessness. And when we talk about mindlessness, it's interesting. There was a study done out of Harvard in 2010, and they were looking at mind wandering and looked, how often is our mind wandering in any given day? And the study concluded that 47% of our day, our minds are wandering. And think about it for yourself. In the past 5 minutes since this presentation has started, where have you been? How much of that time has been focused solely just on being here in this presentation versus maybe opening up another browser, thinking about something that's coming up in the future or something that happened earlier this morning? So our mind is constantly wandering to different places, and we need to just recognize that. And now with the increase of all of our technology and how busy information is being passed and expectations, that's having an effect on our brains. And so mindfulness is this tool for helping us to slow down and rewire important parts of the brain so that we're not taken over by this mindlessness. Another indication that mindfulness is moving towards becoming obvious, and it's more of a trend and it's not a fad, is all the science that's backing it up. And perhaps you've seen some of the literature on the science of mindfulness, but this is just a graph illustrating the number of publications. This is from the early 90s, but it goes back to the early 80s, really, showing the first studies in mindfulness. And Dr. John Kabat-Zinn at the Center for Mindfulness at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center. And we can see that in 2016, close to 800 studies done on the area of mindfulness. There's been a huge flood of interest from across disciplines, looking at the benefits of mindfulness, looking at the impact on the brain, the structural and functional changes in the brain because of mindfulness. So this is all really looking at the benefits of mindfulness. It's similar to the way physical exercise grew, and at some point we didn't even realize physical exercise was beneficial for us. And this notion of mindfulness is really paralleling that trend and looking at the benefits of mental exercise. So we can really look at mindfulness as mental exercise as well. So trying to understand mindlessness and some of the costs of mindlessness. So when we're mindless, how does that impact our stress? And it increases our stress when we're on automatic pilot. We're more easily triggered. When we're mindless and we don't listen to our colleagues, how does that fare for us in our relationships? Often causes conflict. If we're caught up in stories or misperceptions about our relationships with people in the workplace or colleagues, bosses, often lead to conflict. When we're stressed, we can act out in inappropriate ways. If we're sick, we are not at work, we're absent. It could lead to errors and accidents. Just think about when we have slips, trips, or falls. Those are lapses in attention, when we're literally not paying attention in the moment and we didn't see the curb, and we might trip or fall and we might have an accident. So mindlessness, mind wandering has a direct effect on errors and accidents in the workplace. And just think about when you're stressed, how open are you to change? Change is a constant in our world, in the workplace, and when we're stressed, when we're mindless, we're just wanting to maintain control over the status quo, and therefore we're resisting what is changing. So that's another cost. We're no longer as present. We've talked about the impact of presenteeism, as well as opportunities for psychological and social support. If we're mindless, we're literally missing the opportunity to be present and to connect with other people in our workplace, either in our teams or with the people that we're working with. And that could have a negative effect on our ability to connect and be supported by others, or to look for opportunities where we can support others. So looking at some of the returns of mindfulness. Now, what are some of the returns that you might expect as an organization? Well, one is around mental health and well-being. That's a definite one. And we can look at there's a lot of evidence to show that mindfulness supports mental health and well-being. Improved performance. Lots of different ways of measuring performance, productivity. People are more focused, more attentive, able to not be distracted, work more. Leadership excellence, a lot of focus and attention around leadership, change management, mentioned some of the connotations and relationship to change and how mindfulness supports people's mindset of openness and more adaptability in the moment, and therefore being more adaptable and open to changes that are again, looking at relationships and conflict resolution. I think that there is a lot of return in terms of the relationships that are formed in the workplace, our ability to connect and build trust in teams and individuals, which is the cornerstone of effective teamwork. And when we have effective teams, we can become much more efficient. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about some of these as we go along the presentation. I just wanted to introduce them here as a kind of a big picture thinking about some of the returns as well as some of the costs of mindfulness. So let's come into take 5. And if some of you have taken the 30-day mindfulness challenge and you've been introduced to take 5, and we can talk more about how that's integrated into the training a little bit later. But when you just hear the word take 5, consider how, what that means to you. When you hear to take 5, and it might conjure up this notion of taking a break. And how do you take a break? What do you do in your life on a regular basis that gives you a moment to pause, step away? Often when we take 5, in the I was going to say the old days, but a lot of people would go for a cigarette and take 5, and that's one way of taking a break. And if you were going out to just and that seemed to be an acceptable break, not the most healthy break. And now the proposition is that we need to learn how to take 5 in our lives on a continual basis, on a habitual basis, so that we can very seamlessly take these mini breaks and reset ourselves and come back into presence so that we don't get caught up in our mindlessness. Because mindlessness is going to creep in throughout our days, and we need to keep bringing ourselves back and retuning our brains for being more present, more aware, productive, and in relationship to ourselves and others. We need to develop this practice of taking a break and a meaningful break in our lives so that we can develop this, so we can develop resilience. Resilience being the ability to adapt to stresses and adversity, which comes in all aspects of our lives. Right? We all know that are we still here? Oh, I think we just had a little glitch, but I'll start my webcam again, not a worry.
Hi, Geoff. Yeah, we can still hear you fine, but we're also having an issue on our platform. Let's just give it 1 second to see if it refreshes. We do have a lot of participants on the line, so I'm wondering if that's starting to slow the platform down, but we haven't reached capacity. So let's just give it 1 second. Are you able to see on your screen now?
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay, great.
It came at a good time because we're able to be resilient and bounce back from adversity. And we have this well within us. And I think what we all have, I think what we can all appreciate is that life is going to throw curveballs at us. It's not going to go smooth and straightforward. It's not even going to go the way that we expected it to, either in our personal life or in our professional life. And therefore, we need to learn to adapt, and we need to be resilient to these changes that are taking place. And this isn't easy, and so we need to have practices that help us be more resilient. And mindfulness over and over again has been shown to develop this resilience. It's this way of like emptying ourselves in a sense, so that we can fill up again and have this resilience to adapt and bounce back. You know, we need to develop tools, a Take 5 practice, which is going to be adaptive versus maladaptive. And this is in terms of coping, because we all have these maladaptive ways of coping, and that might be, you know, I mentioned smoking, it might be drinking, it could be other forms of addiction, ways of coping with the stresses of our lives. And what we need to develop are these adaptive ways of coping that help us rebound quickly, that help us learn from difficult situations versus just trying to get through them or resist them. And that's the proposition, that's why we need to develop this Take 5 practice in our life. And everybody really needs a Take 5 practice, and everybody has a Take 5 practice. We all have things that we do in our lives that we turn to when the going gets tough, or even just on a regular day. It's just important to question what that practice is, maybe add a new practice into our life, or customize what we're currently doing with a few strategic things that are going to be really helpful. And that's where mindfulness can fit in, because we can build in some principles or a new practice of a mindfulness and action practice, which is Take 5. And I'm going to take you through that right now. And this is a Take 5 practice that we teach on the 30-day mindfulness challenge. It's got 5 steps to it. I'm going to walk you through all 5 steps pretty slowly so that you can get a sense of it. And this is the core practice that we try and teach you on the training. And really the number one goal of the mindfulness challenge is to develop a sustained and customized Take 5 practice. So over the time, the whole point is for you to be able to teach it to yourself and to guide yourself through it, so that you're not dependent on me or on a recording to be able to do the practice, because we like to say mindfulness in action and Take 5 is not a practice that we need to go into a quiet room to do. We don't need to close our eyes, sit on a cushion, put our hands in any specific positions. This is a practice that we can do right now, in the moment, while delivering a webinar, while in a difficult conversation, perhaps you're in a meeting. There's always opportunities to do this practice, to integrate it into your everyday life. So let's get started and see about step 1. So step 1 is about noticing the cue. And what we do, this is an important step, because the most difficult part about mindfulness is remembering to practice. Mindfulness is all about being in the present moment, and what's really difficult is that we constantly forget to do our practice. We forget to realign ourselves with the moment. We get caught up in our head, we're very mindless throughout the day, and we can just go, and we need to remember. So we set cues in our day, and here's an example of checking your email. You know, how often do we check our email? And if we set, over the challenge, we create a number of different cues, so that they're all regular things, from brushing our teeth to walking, standing up, drinking, checking your email when you're in a difficult moment, a stressful moment, things that happen to all of us. And they're supposed to trigger you, cue you to Take 5. Okay, so that's the whole point of having your cue, and you can start to customize your own. Looks like I got I'm just going to catch up here. So I got put back in the slides. Excuse me. The second step is around noticing something new. So in this moment, so for step 1, I'm cueing you. I'm cueing you to do your Take 5 practice. And second step is notice something new. There's always moments or stimulus presenting novelty in your everyday experience. And for this moment, I'm going to just going to ask you to even close your eyes and maybe just pay attention to hearing, to sounds, just around you. I'm going to be quiet as well so that I'm not the sound. But close your eyes, and for even 10 seconds, just try and pay attention to sounds around you, arising and falling away. You don't have to like the sounds or not like the sounds. Just see if you can pay attention to sounds arising and falling away. So we're bringing our attention back to something that's happening in the present moment. We're bringing our senses, our sense of hearing, and noticing something new. We can notice any sense. So it could be sight, noticing novelty in our sight, or noticing something new in our colleagues who we're working with. We miss so much, but this practice of noticing newness around us can help us bring us back into the moment. It can also help to build relationships with other people if you're noticing new things about somebody else or about yourself. But the basics is that we're typically caught up in our heads somewhere else, and if we can pay attention to something novel through our senses, through our sense of taste, sense of sight, sense of hearing, sense of touch, that brings us back into the moment. It literally activates different parts of our neural circuitry to help us bring us into the moment more present. And here's a quote from a participant, somebody that we've worked with. It's a time of great change at the company that I work with, and Take 5 application is coming in handy as I try to adjust to changes taking place, to stay calm and listen actively. So I think that was just an example of also change management and staying open to novelty. Noticing the body. That's step 3 of Take 5, noticing our body. It's an incredibly important part of mindfulness, and it can definitely be integrated into our everyday at work because we always have our bodies, but we rarely pay attention to them. So in this moment, I'm going to invite you to just tune into the body. Maybe you feel your feet on the floor, the touch points with your shoes. Maybe you can lift and lengthen up through the spine. Feeling the body, maybe your touch points with your chair if you're sitting or if you're standing. Just pressing through the heels. And just taking a few moments to feel into the body. And when we feel into the body, this is really important for a number of reasons, both for just bringing our attention back into the present moment, but also noticing cues in the body. Okay, the body is constantly giving us information, for example, about tension in your shoulders. Maybe if we're noticing the body, we're noticing tension in our shoulders, maybe squinting in our eyes, or if you've been concentrating hard or staring at a screen for too long, tightness in your back, fluttering in your stomach, feeling anxiety or anxious somewhere, a racing mind. So when we're noticing the body, we're coming back in tune with the information and cues that the body is giving us. And that's really important information for us to know, because that could let us know in terms of how we might be reactive in a certain situation, how we might, and that's going to dictate the quality of work that we're doing and maybe what we might say to somebody in the workplace. So noticing how, your comfort level in the body. So noticing the body as you are in a meeting or having a conversation, and how can you both tune into the body and also relax parts of the body. So this is a integrative practice that you can do. An employee at Enbridge said the body cannot be in a fight or flight mode when it's relaxed, and being able to take 5 has helped reduce stress responses significantly. So these are quotes that we get from people going through our training as a kind of an exit survey. They share with us some of the experiences they've had, and they're quite right. the physiological stress response can't be activated when we're relaxing. And it's the parasympathetic or the sympathetic nervous system. And so when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, the fight or flight, we're all ramped up. But then when we learn to relax and engage the parasympathetic nervous system, then we're able to relax the body, and that has a tremendous impact on what parts of the brain are activated. When we're stressed, we're activating our amygdala, it's the fight or flight. We're seeing kind of negative things in our perception, and we're missing all the reality, the potentially opportunities. All we're seeing is threats, and we want to run for our life or fight. And that's why when we downregulate the stress response, we're able to see new opportunity and feel more in the moment. Step 4, notice the breath. You might, breathing is always a big part to mindfulness if you practice at all. And, breathing is not esoteric in any way. One of the main reasons why it's such an important component to mindfulness is because we all have a breath, and it's always happening in the present moment. So we can always pay attention to it. It's just a good point to pay attention to because it's always arising and falling away. So in this moment, I'm going to ask you to notice one complete breath, moving into the body and moving out. And see if you can lengthen and deepen that breath. So the inhale and the exhale is about 5 seconds. And here's the challenging part. See if you can take 5 breaths like that. So the inhale and the exhale counts as 1 breath. And see if you can take 5 breaths like that. The mind is going to wander. We know that already. So just come back. Stay connected with the felt sensation of the breath in the body. And we can always stay connected with our breath as we continue throughout the presentation, throughout the day. It's one of the most powerful tools that we have in our arsenal is breathing, and learning to connect with our breathing. It helps us through the most difficult of times is when we just come back to take it 1 breath at a time, because in life that's really all we have, is we can just take it 1 breath at a time when you break it right down. So it's always there for you to stay close to, and it also has this tremendous physiological benefits for relaxing our body and bringing it back into homeostasis. Step 5 of Take 5 is notice now. So we've got notice the cue, notice something new, notice the breath, notice the body, and notice now. And notice now is all about noticing what's in this present moment now. What can you see that's present? It's noticing your mindset as well. A mindset of, with mindfulness, we're trying to cultivate a mindset of non-judgment, of openness, of trust, and patience. So whatever situation has arisen in the workplace, maybe you're in a conflict situation with a colleague, and can you notice, what's the situation? What's your mindset? Are you judging something? Are you being impatient? How open are you being in this moment? So noticing now is about noticing what mindset you can bring into the present moment. It's also noticing how you feel in the body, or what's present for you, and how can you bring the same mindset of non-judgment or openness of patience to yourself, not just others. So we're always cultivating this kind of caring or compassionate attitude to both ourselves and to others. Here's a couple of quotes that I thought were relevant. Connection is the energy that is created between people when you feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment. Psychological safety is shared belief held by a member of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So again, how we're relating, these are connected with relational practices of mindfulness and how it affects us in teams and how our mindset, and we bring our mindset into working with others, can create strong, effective teams. When a colleague is saying something frustrating in a meeting, I am more aware, manage my reaction better, and approach the situation with openness and curiosity to gather context and solve the problem. So this is huge. We probably experiencing these moments on a daily basis, and how aware we are we of our reactions? And look at what happens when we are. We all of a sudden see new opportunities. So I'd like to move on to the third kind of component, tips for implementing mindfulness into an organization. I'll do my best to just share some stories from my experience and where I see as really best practices for implementing mindfulness into an organization. We've seen a big trend of mindfulness coming into the workplace. You know, we started by seeing mindfulness in medicine and healthcare, in mental health. We've seen mindfulness move into education, and I think over the last 5 years, we've seen a big trend of mindfulness into the workplace as well. And it is a unique context, and every time it iterates into a different context, it needs some customization. So the number one tip is, I think that it's really important to use a whole company approach. That means from executives, leaders, right to the front lines. I think we need to focus on everyone in the organization. There's a lot of trainings out there that might just focus on executives, and they go out and it's intensive training for the top 10% in the organization, leadership development. And I think when we look at cultivating mindfulness in an organization, it's really important to focus on the whole organization. Excuse me. And that's not an easy thing to do, because there's financial considerations, and how do you start to reach an organization that has thousands of employees, and they're distributed. And that's where I think it's important to start to get into trainings that use a blended approach, both online and in person. So I do think that when we're really trying to make a concerted effort for integrating mindfulness into an organization, it really needs to come at a whole organization approach. Everyone, not just the top, not just the people on the front lines, but everyone. And I'll further explain that. MindWell-U model, we use this model to help break it down, that MWU stands for me, we, and you. The me is we're targeting practices at the individual level. We want the person to adopt mindfulness for themselves, for their personal and professional life, practices that relate to themselves. We also want to provide training and practices for the relational aspect of the work. Most of our work is done in relationship with others. Most of life is in relationship to others, and so we need to cultivate mindfulness not just as a solitary practice, kind of sitting in our own bubble, but also how do we cultivate the skills of mindfulness when working with others, as well as the U, the organization, stands for the organization, is how do we integrate principles and practices into our policies as an organization. So it's not just placed on the individual, it's not just something the individual has to do, it's not just something that needs to be practiced in teams, but also from more of a systemic level, how can we integrate mindfulness? It's a very holistic approach. I'll use an example. You working around workload management. This is one of the factors from the psychological health and safety, and mindfulness shifts one's relation. So how do we how do we adapt with workload management? And from a me perspective, mindfulness might shift one's relationship to the work. So people might feel like they're overwhelmed with the amount of workload that they have, but mindfulness from a personal level can help them become more focused, efficient. From a we perspective, it could, when we learn practices for working in a group, we can make the team more efficient, and therefore that helps to reduce the workload. And from a you perspective, it's influencing cultural norms, policies and procedures around workload expectations and balance. You know, one trend I've seen or we've heard about more and more is like emailing after work hours. That can have an effect on people's well-being and after work. So the policy of no emailing after work hours, because people receiving an email on a weekend might throw off their whole weekend, might make them feel that they need to get work done when this is their downtime. So just an example of how we can work on all three levels, the me, the we, and the you, the organizational, when we're looking at integrating mindfulness. And this is big picture thinking, but this is where I think we're going in terms of a successful and sustainable integration of mindfulness into an organization for shifting the culture. Reaching employees across the continuum. So it's really important when we're integrating mindfulness into the workplace to look at involving as many people in the organization as possible. This is not just a mental health and wellness approach. This is a leadership development approach. This is about team building. This is about change management. This is about culture development. This is about benefits. We try and bring as many people on board within the organization as possible because it's affecting all of their areas. It has the potential to affect all these different areas. It also affects early intervention, people who are at risk, who are off work or trying to return them to work or stay at work. So it's important to, again, bring on board as many people in an organization. Number two, the tip is around marketing communications. It's a huge role around getting the word out there around mindfulness, especially when you're rolling it out to a organization. You know, we roll this out, our trainings out to organizations with 5, 10, 15,000 employees, and marketing communications plays a huge role. And it's important because it's not just about it's not just about a one-time thing in one program. It's about being creative. And we see some examples, some images of, I think it was one of our clients who are creating these creative images about promoting the training. We provide different posters and a digital marketing kit for getting the message out. And I encourage you to think about that significantly, about what marketing communication tools and strategies and supports you have when you're bringing mindfulness into your organization. Number 3 is mindfulness as a tool for achieving your organizational goals. Mindfulness is not the end goal. And sometimes if you make mindfulness the end goal, you're making that a barrier. So mindfulness should be a tool that you're using to achieve the organizational goal. So make that as and this relates to communications and marketing, use your end goal and your strategic initiatives, your values. That's really what the message is. Mindfulness is just a tool for reaching your goals. And that's an important message for communicating perhaps to executives when you're trying to bring this forward. It's important to build the business case. I know a lot of you are interested. How do you get this forward in an organization? How do you get it to the attention of people who can sign off on it? Build the business case. There's a lot of evidence to show the benefits of mindfulness, both in personal and growing evidence in the workplace. We do a lot of research. We partner with different organizations. I'll mention some studies in a moment about bringing mindfulness and doing studies. We also provide an HR dashboard. This is an example of an HR dashboard of one of our clients. So when organizations go through our 30-day mindfulness challenge, they get to see how many people are going through, what are the outcomes people are experiencing. We have 2 surveys that we integrate in our training. So I think that that's an important component to build into your implementation strategies, to get some feedback and some knowledge about the ROI on your intervention. This is one study that we did was a feasibility study with the UBC Sauder School of Business. I'm going to move a bit quickly. Two things that was interesting. We were looking at kind of behaviors and deviant behaviors in the workplace. And what we found is through our training was it actually reduced these dark personality traits of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathology. And because those are all things that are associated with counterproductive or deviant workplace behaviors, we also saw a reduction in deviant workplace behaviors. So mindfulness actually might have this benefit for how we're relating to others. It makes sense that it would, but it's still trying to build the scientific case for how it affects people's behavior in the workplace. Sorry for moving a little bit quickly here, but I'd like to get to questions that are coming up. We have a really exciting research coming year, working within the federal government, a number of different departments within the government, using their employee engagement survey, partnering with different researchers at York University at the business school, the Schulich Business School, looking at incivility and harassment in the workplace and engagement and well-being. And uniquely looking at what happens when we start to offer mindfulness training as a whole and look at really as this whole organization. How many people need to go through the training before it starts affecting others? And what's the contagion effect, so to speak? And by that I mean, if we have 20% of the organization practicing mindfulness, how does that start to impact everybody else in the organization, just through our experiences of others? I think we know that other people were contagious, and it's somebody with a positive attitude or how they treat us has an effect on ourselves. So starting to look at the group effects of mindfulness training in an organization, not just the individual effects. So that's an exciting research project that's coming up this coming year. So I'm going to kind of close it there. Maybe I'll leave this slide up just because it's somewhat of a nice image. And apologize for going a little bit quickly there over a lot of content, but I hope that you were able to take away something, and I'll invite our any questions at this time.
Thank you so much, Geoff. That was a great presentation, a great overview of what mindfulness is, as well as how it can be implemented and integrated within the workplace. I must say also personally, sometimes hosting webinars can be a bit of a stressful technical experience, and taking 5 through that process was lovely. So I thank you for that. We have had a lot of questions that have come through, so I'll just kind of get to them so we can get through as many as possible in the about 10-12 minutes we have left. So one question that came in is, are multitasking and mindfulness mutually exclusive ideas? Can one multitask and still practice mindfulness at the same time?
It's an interesting question. It's a slide I often talk about. And so I think that they are mutually exclusive, and there's somewhat of a misunderstanding around multitasking, because we think we're doing multiple things at a time. But when you look a little bit closer, what we actually see is we're switching from one task to another rapidly. And so we're switching. Maybe I'll ask you, what happens when you have too many browsers open on your computer? If you open up like 10 different browsers on your computer or screens, it slows down the memory of the computer. It slows down the whole computer. Same thing happens with us. When we're doing too many things at one time, we're slowing down the speed at which we can do anything and the quality at which we can do anything. So we think we're doing multiple things at a time, but really we're switching from one thing to the next. And with mindfulness, we're just intentionally working on one thing and then switching to the next thing. So it's this practice of working mindfully is like opening a window, working on something, and then closing it when you're done, and then opening something else, versus trying to juggle too many balls in the air, and that's slowing down our RAM, and it's affecting the quality of our work.
Thank you so much. Another question is just kind of about the sustainability of practicing mindfulness. It's one thing to start it, but it's another thing to keep it sustained. How do we convince employees to practice daily and not just stop after a few days? And do you have any tips for sustaining this practice?
It's a really good question, and I think what we've seen from a traditional sense of learning mindfulness, it's been a meditation practice. You've gone through maybe a mindfulness-based stress reduction program, an 8-week program. They're typically teaching a longer, more intensive meditation practice, which has tremendous value, and that's the tradition that I learned from and practice. Going on longer meditation retreats. I've done a lot of that in my past, so I really hold a value for that type of practice. At the same time, I think as we move into the workplace, I think it's time for being innovative around how we practice mindfulness, how we learn mindfulness, and how we bring it out to an organization as a whole. If you have thousands of employees, not everyone is ready for meditation, and it might be a barrier right off the bat if that's what you're trying to teach people. And so I think we need to be creative and innovative in how we are teaching mindfulness, and that's one of the reasons why we developed Take 5 and trying to make it more of a in-action practice. And this relates to sustainability because the whole point of learning Take 5, for example, is to learn this and to customize your practice so that it's not mindfulness isn't something that you need to do. There is a practice component. It's like going to the gym, and it's important to do your gym practice. But it's such an integrative practice as well, and that's where these cues into our day, I would suggest maybe adding these cues into your day to help remind you to do the practice so that we don't forget, and learn maybe mini practices that can be integrated into your daily routine, as well as if you'd like to support others, maybe it's in your team. How can you build mindfulness into more of the team experience, whether it's a meeting, whether you start a meeting with a mindfulness practice or a reminder, something as part of the new norm within your organization. So I think that adding cues into your day, simplifying your practice, more of an integrative practice, making your lunch a mindful eating lunch, taking a coffee break where your coffee break is your mindful practice, just drinking your coffee, not checking your email, not talking to anybody, just make drinking your coffee your practice moment.
Perfect. Thank you for those suggestions. That's really helpful. Kind of along the same lines of sustainability, so you spoke earlier in the presentation about how meditation was kind of a fad or a fashion in the 60s and 70s. So there's a question on kind of why you think why mindfulness now will be more effective and more long-lasting as a practice, and why was it kind of a fad before but here to stay now?
I'm not sure. I mean, in terms of a fad, I'm not sure if meditation itself was a fad, so to speak. I think it's moved out of a fad in some ways because it's had this lasting effect. I mean, it's been around for a long time. Fads come and go really quickly, whereas trends last. And I think what we see is mindfulness and meditation has lasted over time. And so I think it's moving into something that is more stable and not going anywhere. And mindfulness is not going anywhere because it has so much to do with a core component to who we are as human beings. It's fundamental to who we are. It's this, I like to talk about mindfulness as a core competency for ourselves, and it's a core competency just like, that's why I relate it to literacy. It's just like learning to read or write. It's something that we all are needing to learn how to do because it helps us to operate in today's world. It's necessary in today's world given the busyness and the speed at which we're moving and the amount of information we're taking in. It's affecting our brains, and mindfulness is a practice for helping us rebalance our brains. So it's fundamental to who we are. It's kind of a critical part to our health and well-being, and it's just a way of understanding our minds and our brains. I think that we're constantly learning new things about our brains. Things are moving from obscure to obvious, as I mentioned at the start of the presentation. And now we found this new, what was obscure practice, and it's becoming just totally obvious that this is necessary, and it's a key part to our operating system, so to speak, and learning about this mind, this voice in our head, how to relate to this voice in our head, and how to come back and just enjoy the moments.
Thanks so much. I think just in closing, one last question. We've had several questions just about kind of the logistics of the 30-day mindfulness trial. So could you just kind of give us a bit of an overview of what that is and how participants will get the details about that?
Yeah, for sure. So we will be sending you a link to sign up for the 30-day mindfulness challenge. It's a 30-day training. So when you sign up, it's all online. You'll be invited to register. And when you register, you can also invite a buddy to register. So that could be any person that you want. So it's always done in pairs, best done in your pairs, because we view mindfulness as mental exercise. And just like your physical exercise, you're more likely to go and do it if you have a workout buddy. So this is your mental workout buddy. You can invite somebody that you want to do it with you. And I encourage you to choose a good buddy. It's probably the most important choice you make around the challenge, is to choose a good buddy. Not some person that you think could benefit from mindfulness, but somebody who's already open to it and wants to engage with it, so that they're going to support you to stay engaged. You'll sign up. I believe we're going to start maybe next Tuesday, and on day one, receive a daily email on next Tuesday, and that will give you a link to go to the application to get your content. So every day there's new content. There's a new queue for Take 5. And you'll go through the content. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes to go through the daily content. You can interact with your buddy. Excuse me, I've got a little bell ringing there. It's a good reminder to pause. Feel your body and your breath. Lots of cues in our surrounding to Take 5. And so you'll get that by email. 5 to 10 minutes a day, and you can communicate with your buddy online via the application and share your experience, so that you can share what's going on for you and what you're learning. Was that and we can put up an email as well if you have any further questions. You can contact us.
Great. Yeah, I'll just put your email up on the slide there. So from my understanding, everyone who registered for the webinar will receive an email from you shortly with all the details about signing up and getting that trial started.
Right. The only caveat to that was that we were looking at, I think we were capping it around 3 people per organization.
Okay.
So that we weren't getting the whole organization going through the training. But we do want to make it available for people who are interested in the training to benefit from it, and also potentially see the value of bringing it to their organization.
Perfect. Great. So if anyone has any questions, there's an email there for contact. So thank you so much, Geoff, and for going through our questions. I'll just do a quick wrap-up. A reminder to all the participants that today's webinar is part of a monthly webinar series that we do on workplace-related topics. It's hosted on the last Wednesday of every month, and the next webinar in the series is scheduled for Wednesday, September 26th. For more information on this webinar, it'll be posted on our website shortly, and registration will open shortly for that also. If you'd like to receive invitations for the commissions from the Mental Health Commission to register for these events, please ensure to sign up for our newsletter or send an email to webinar@mentalhealthcommission.ca. We hope that you enjoyed today's webinar. At the end of this webinar, you'll be directed to a brief evaluation survey when you close the window down. We ask that you kindly take a few minutes to let us know how you felt about the webinar, and it will help us to continue to improve our webinar series. If you're unable to complete the survey immediately following the webinar, a link will also be included in a thank you email for the event. So with that, I'd like to close today's webinar and thank you all for joining us today. Another big thank you to our guest speaker, Dr. Geoff Soloway, for sharing his knowledge today about mindfulness and how you can integrate that into your workplace. Thank you to my colleagues here in the room with me today to help to run this webinar, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much, everybody.